Morning all. I'm going to chat to you today about reviving an open source project. So a little while ago I took over a project called Shouldy. Who has used or heard of Shouldy before? A few. So Shouldy is a .NET assertion framework. The idea is rather than going assert.equal, you have whatever you are testing, so the actual dot should be something else. So it just flips it around a little bit. The main goal of Shouldy is to give you awesome exception messages. So say you've got a Boolean type, you go blah should be assert equals something and then true, or assert.isTrue. You just get a fail saying true should be false or something along those lines. Shouldy, when it fails, goes back to your source code, has a look at whatever you were saying should be something, and that'll put that into the exception message. So you get a really rich experience. You see the variable that you're asserting against and those sort of things. So Shouldy wasn't my project. Shouldy has been around for ages, but I was using it in various projects and it fell short in a few areas. It just didn't have enough extension methods and those sort of things. So I wanted to get involved. The problem was that Shouldy hadn't had a release for about a year, and there was about a dozen open pull requests, so it just wasn't actively being maintained. A lot of the story today is about how I got involved in open source, not specifically Shouldy, and then towards the second half of the talk, really talking about taking over an open source project. I can't imagine too many people will take over. Adam's taken over a few, but yeah, it doesn't seem to be something that happens a lot, but there's a nice transition period. That's me. You can get in contact with me via any of those. I've been doing open source for quite a while. My first pull request was to AutoMapper, so Jimmy Bogard's talking here later, I think it's tomorrow, and I was just using AutoMapper and we were coming up against a few shortcomings, but I was using it in my job and decided to make that step. I'd pulled it down locally, fixed up our problems, and we were using a custom build. So we pushed that. I submitted a pull request, got it merged. So that was in 2010. That was really my entry to open source. From there, I got involved in a number of open source projects. So Paul Stovall, who has started Octopus Deploy, I was working with him at the time, and he helped me out, did a lot of mentoring, that sort of stuff. So I started following all of his projects and got involved in DBUp, FunnelWeb, and a couple of others. So that was my entry into open source. There's three main things I want to cover today. Who has contributed to an open source project? Everyone. That's awesome. So the first bit, which I'll skip over because I don't think you guys are going to get much out of it, is getting involved, just making sure that you actually can get it into a project. But the next area is stepping up. Who is a maintainer of a project? Most of the audience. Awesome. And then finally, the last section of the talk is all about building a community. This is a lot of my personal learnings just from around open source. So because when I started getting involved, DBUp and a few other projects, I just got a little bit too enthusiastic about fixing issues and writing a lot of code because I was enjoying it. I was getting a lot out of it. Making that transition from I'm just contributing to actually building a community around these projects to get other people involved, to really build them up and build the community around these projects, I find is really, really important. Shouldy was one of the first projects that I've done that side of it, worked through the community, that sort of stuff. Another project of mine, Git Version, similar sort of techniques, building the community. Both of these projects have multiple active contributors, and now they've got multiple maintainers. I'm not the sole maintainer anymore. And that's quite important because as you get busy in life, taking a step back, being the only maintainer of this stuff really, really sucks. So we've got a few script CS people, and I think Glenn made the good decision early to try and build up that core team, have multiple people really makes a difference in how these projects evolve and how quickly they can ramp up. So the first thing around getting involved is trying to make sure the barrier to entry in your projects is really, really low. So this is the top of the Shouldy issues list. The thing I want to point out here is these jump in tags. There was a little movement a little while ago. Nick Molnar, who's up the back, he wrote a blog post around this, introducing this concept of up for grabs. And the idea is that any issue that is marked with jump in or up for grabs or any of these things should be well defined, and anyone can come along, grab it, and go ahead. So you can hit upforgrabs.net, heap of projects under there that follow this topic. And there's another one that Hanselman's and a few others have started doing, which is My First PR. And the idea of that one is that anything that's not on the critical path doesn't really need to be fixed straight away. That's a nice small step into open source. Mark it as your first PR, and the idea of that is only someone who hasn't contributed to open source before pick that up. There's plenty of ways to contribute. If the way that most people want to get involved is around just pick up an issue, write some code, I've got a problem. But there's a heap of things that often get missed. Having good documentation's a massive one. I'll show how I've set Shouldy up later. Creating an issue, also really handy. Those discussion points, super, super handy. Start building the community, giving people something to attach to and work through. Answering questions on Stack Overflow and different things just builds the amount of knowledge around that open source framework. Really important. Writing blog posts. Since I kicked Shouldy off again, there's been a number of blog posts from people from the community, ranging from, I've just got into open source, I submitted my first open source pull request against Shouldy, and talking about the process and how he learnt to actually contribute. Those sort of blog posts are great because you can continue throwing those out, and they're a great entry point, especially if they're sort of around the getting involved in an open source project. And then the other one is investigating issues. People are posting questions all the time in these open source projects. Pick it up, just investigate it yourself. You don't need to wait for the maintainer to do all of that stuff. Writing good pull requests is another thing that really, really helps the maintainers out. So a lot of this is, of this talk is kind of thinking about what makes it easier for people not only to get involved, but just around the maintainers, the community side of things. We want these projects to be really successful and move on. So pull requests is the way you guys have all done it, the way you get code into an open source project. They need to be focused, so only do one thing. This is one of the awesome things about Git. It allows you to jump around, have multiple branches, these workflows. It allows us to have really, really focused pull requests. Don't get distracted. You see something else, if you're adding a feature, don't change white space. Separate those two things, because then they can be merged in independently. Don't submit a pull request that doesn't have tests. If the project has a lot of tests, don't just put extra code in there without tests. It makes it hard for the maintainer to merge that, and then they have to go back later. Stick to the style of the project. I see this a lot, where people come in and they do resharper formats with their own styles and those sort of things. It's really no-go. If you are taking over a project, making sure that you just continue it on and just keep the style of the project, because it's really important to keep those, everyone that's contributing needs to see the consistent style across the code base. And without that, you don't have a clear direction. So keeping to the style, don't bike shed. And finally, make it as easy as possible for the maintainer to merge. If you are getting distracted, not having a focused pull request, those sort of things, it's really hard. Or mixing concerns. There might be one thing that the maintainer wants, but not another. If you haven't separated those things, the whole pull request will stall, and it's a lot of work for everyone involved. That's getting involved. The next step is actually stepping up, making sure that you go past the drive-by contributions and into the let's help out this project grow and things over time. So in Shouldy's case, we were actually, when I first took it over, had about 10 open pull requests and those sort of things. And a bunch of issues of people having problems with it, and it just not been touched for a long time. Being someone who just jumps into open source whenever I see the problem, I really didn't want this to continue. I wanted Shouldy to come back. So I got in touch with the original author, and just like Adam, as soon as I pinged him, he's like, great, someone that's actually interested in getting this project, gave me commit rights and allowed me to start merging these pull requests and moving forward. It was awesome. So in the space of a month or so, we'd cleared the backlog of all of the pull requests, we'd got a fresh release out, and that drove a lot of the people who had created those pull requests back to Shouldy. They started getting involved, they started opening more issues, and we started getting traction in the project again. It was really, really cool. But this time, I didn't want to just take over and put all of the effort in. So I'm also the maintainer of another project called White. It's originally a ThoughtWorks project for UI automation of rich clients, like WPF, WinForms, those sort of things. And when I got involved in that, I was using it heavily for work, and there was a bunch of things I wanted to fix. So I spent all of my time just coding, fixing these issues. But I didn't spend any time around the peripheries, documentation, making sure all the issues were triaged, making sure that I had a contributing .markdown, all of these things that help build community. I didn't do any of that. And now I'm in the stage that I don't personally have time to maintain that project. I've taken on too many others, and there's no community behind White that's driving it forward. I didn't want to make those mistakes again. So this time was all about trying to build up the involvement of the community while while reinvigorating this project rather. To get involved in issues, there's a few things that you can do straight away. Just asking more information. Subscribe to the watch on projects you're interested in, and then as new issues are posted, jump in, ask questions from the original author. If there's not enough information specified, it's not required that the maintainer need to have all of this control over everything. You can just jump in, contribute, get a conversation going. Re-summarize things. As you've got a bunch of different comments and things, you've got 30 odd, sometimes you have GitHub issues that have 30 or so comments in them. Re-summarize that at the end. Just here's the action point. After breaking it all down, what are we going to do? If you see that from there's reached a consensus and a conclusion, just re-summarize it. Then that can be taken by the maintainer and create a new up for grabs issue or something like that. Another one that I've found really helpful that I've seen happen in Shouldy and Git version quite a bit is a few people jumping in. Once pull requests have been merged, the original issues haven't been tagged properly. Just people from the community saying, this is done in this pull request, allows me to just close it without having to do all of that reconciliation. Really, really useful. So these are sort of ways that you can step up your involvement in the community and not even in projects that you run. The other one is start reviewing pull requests. You don't have to be the maintainer of a project to actually review pull requests. Xbehave.net is an example of this. A while ago there was a support async. So this was when we had async and await all coming out, and there was that gap. A lot of projects didn't actually do it. So Xbehave, we wanted to support async. I'm not involved in the project at all. There's another one called BDD-Fi, which is another BDD framework that I'm involved in. But about a month earlier, I'd done the async support for BDD-Fi. So I saw Adam and a few other people talking about this async support on GitHub, and on Twitter, and there was a pull request there being worked on. So I just jumped straight into this, started saying, I've implemented it over here, reviewing the code for the pull request. Here's a few things that could be done differently or improved or whatever. But after that, just stepped out. Haven't done anything with xbehave.net since. But I think that whole process was really useful. It shows that we can, as a community, we can start blending between these different projects. No worries. So that was really cool. And that was sort of the point that I'm like, okay, well, just because I have a project over here that conflicts doesn't really mean that as a community we shouldn't try and build these things up. Shouldy, there's another project which sort of competes with Shouldy called Fluent Assertions. And Dennis, who runs that, he's sent a number of people across to Shouldy and vice versa, because both are great projects. We keep stealing ideas from each other, but they approach the problem in a different way, and different people enjoy the programming styles of either Shouldy or Fluent Assertions. So when people start asking for Fluent style and chaining and all these sort of things, I often push them over to that project because it's probably a better fit for them. This building of the .NET community to start these projects intermingling and moving people between them, I think is a really, really good thing. It's great to see, and it's really, the last year or so, just seeing the evolution in the .NET community about who is getting involved and who's interested in those sort of things has been amazing to see. Becoming a maintainer is kind of the next step. So you've got involved, you've started helping the maintainer to triage issues, you've been jumping into pull requests and those sort of things. When you want to take that next step up, which is become a contributor, become a maintainer, start taking some of the roles and responsibilities of the project. There's a couple of things. The first one is you really want to be respectful of the original author's intent. And this is really important when you're taking over a project. So when I was getting involved with DBUp, one of the things that Paul sort of highlighted that when I got involved is clearly I understand the intent of the project now. I've been merging pull requests and having a look at, well, getting involved with different pull requests. I've really understood the original intent. Getting involved and then trying to change things, it can be pretty disastrous for a project. So that's why often projects get forked and those sort of things, because the intent is changing. Avoid bike shedding, which is what color is this, how's it formatted, those sort of things. Initially, obviously, when you're taking over a project, you're putting your time and effort into that project now. It's becoming yours, but changing those sort of things early can be really, really detrimental to the project. And I've found this just from when I was getting started and taking over some of these projects. I had the ways that I was comfortable doing things, and I applied those to the project, and it becomes excluding for a lot of the people who are already involved. Re-engage the community. So when I took over Shouldy, got the community re-engaged. These are one of the learnings that I should have done with some other projects. And I've started trying to do this with DBUp. Like re-engage the community, start getting other people involved, those sort of things. And then get on top of issues ASAP. There were so many issues in Shouldy that just had no action. They were just accumulated over time, and because they weren't being closed out, there wasn't a real clear path. No one could jump in and say, okay, I can pick up this issue. You spend so much time reading. Just get on top of all of the issues, make sure you're across what needs to be done, and then you're in a really good position to take the project forward and maintain. I've been on the other side of the fence as well. So there was a movement a little while ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago, called Code 52. It was a great idea. There was about 5 of us that got it started, and the plan was that we were going to create an open source project every week for a year, and that was Code 52. I think we got to 16 or something around that, maybe 20, before most of the core team just burnt out. But it was a really, really interesting process. We started engaging the community, but because it was only the core team that were there project to project, and we ended up carrying these projects through. But there were a couple of really cool projects that dropped out at the end of that. One of them's Pretzel, and it's a static site generator. And Dave's going to be talking about his static site generator later in a lightning talk. But Pretzel was really cool because who's used Jekyll before out of interest and knows what it is? Okay, so if you use GitHub Pages or like github.io pages and those sort of things, the site generator behind that is actually Jekyll. So Pretzel was designed as a .NET implementation of Jekyll because we didn't really want to run Ruby and those sort of things, so we rebuilt it. Anyway, there's a bunch of people that have taken that, which is really nice to see. marapps.metro was when the Windows 8 Metro, when it was still called Metro, came out. We were all using WPF, so we wanted the similar styles and animations and look and feel. Started marapps.metro. I was heavily involved with that because I was using it at work, and then I wasn't, and it sat there for a while. But now a few people have actually picked up that project, taken over. They now maintain it. It's completely independent. And the original team that created that, no one's involved. It's completely hands-off. It's moved to people who are using it actively, which is awesome. WebAPI.how was an interesting one for me because I wrote it on a plane going to Melbourne because I had a talk, and I just threw it up as a NuGet package, put the code out there, and it was really just so I could demonstrate a RESTful hypermedia-based API. But a couple of people have jumped on board with that, and now others are maintaining it. I don't do a lot in that space, so yeah, I've had people just take over, and it's really, seeing it from the other side is really interesting because it's your project and you see the hesitation when people are getting involved. They don't want to take control of the project. They don't want to do anything which might offend you as the original maintainer. So it's really important to communicate to people who are trying to get involved that you're more than happy for them to take ownership of this project, that you want the community to own it, not yourself. Next is building a community. We've talked a lot about the contributor side of things. I really wanted Shouldy to have that strong community, as I've said before. I don't want to take it on, and this is a very selfish thing. I've got a lot out of open source, really, really a lot of things, and I want to continue getting a lot out of open source. But keeping all of these projects afloat is just not good for the community in general. Being a sole person maintaining a bunch of projects is just detrimental for the community at large. So I've really wanted to try and backfill, build communities. Seeing all of these successful open source projects like ScriptCS and Nancy building these amazing communities, I sort of starting to try and model a lot of my open source work around those guys. There's a big step between contributing and maintaining. Who's a maintainer of a project? So one of the big transitions for me when maintaining is actually just getting across all of those things that you need to do. Think about releasing your software, having that project direction, making sure that when you're getting pull requests in, that they align to where you want to go. I've seen Jimmy on AutoMapper quite a few times talking about how he's accepted all of these changes over time, and he feels that a lot of those things were not perfectly aligned with AutoMapper, and he's now having to spend a lot of time and effort to make sure the project is where he wants it to be. So making sure all of those things are communicated well, and when people do want these extra features, explain to them why it's not core, and it could be something on the side or something along those lines. So that communication part becomes extremely important. The next thing that I found quite useful is mentoring. So instead of writing code in Shouldy and get version, spend a heap more time mentoring other people. So when they want to get involved, spending time, jump on Skype, work through the issue with them. If they have problems with Git, actually spend time, teach them how to do it. When they get stuck, rather than just taking their pull request and merging it by yourself and fixing all of those issues up, work with them to fix up their own pull request. Things like that. One of the Shouldy contributors, his Twitter handle is Joe Mighty. I've made him a core member, and he's one of the people who wrote the blog posts around my first pull request into open source around Shouldy. He didn't know Git, so I spent a lot of time helping him with Git, and he's got so much out of the process, as well as myself, like taking someone into a project, helping them get to a point where they are now leading. They're merging pull requests. They're teaching people how to use Git and get themselves out of a problem. That cycle of just making sure that you're bringing up the next round of open source developers, because the people at this conference, clearly most of them and most of you are in open source. You understand, you're struggling with getting more people. We want to build that community. Jumping on and mentoring. A great example of someone who does this really well is Llewellyn Falco, who does the approvaltests.net. Whenever you want to contribute a feature, he just pings you on Skype and says, let's pair, and pulls up, does a Skype pairing session, and you work through the feature together, talks about all of these problems. So I've contributed 2 or 3 different features to approval tests, and I've not seen anyone do that before, but I've got a lot out of that process. Yep.
Anecdotally, the mentoring of people helps the whole community. I actually just got a PR from Joe Mighty last week.
Awesome.
On a totally separate project. So
that's excellent.
See that kind of spreading out and influencing other projects too.
That's an awesome story. So yeah, Joe hadn't submitted a pull request to open source 6 months ago, and now he's not only helping me maintain Shouldy, he's submitting pull requests to other projects. Awesome to hear. They're the sort of success stories that we want to see and want to really build. Conferences like this allow us to do that. And finally, releases. This is one of the big things that I find takes a lot of time, and started a bunch of little projects that help this, but never finished them. Things like creating release notes and calling out the community members that have actually put work into that release, making sure you do that. It's one of those things that is quite a bit of effort, but when you start calling people out and giving them recognition for the work they've put into a project, it really helps feed that. Oh, that's awesome. I'm getting a warm, fuzzy feeling because my name's up there, contributed to a project. For us that have been doing it for a while, that side of things is the novelty's worn off, but for people coming in, it's really, really important. It just keeps everything moving forward. Triaging issues. Some of the learnings I've had around this are making sure every open issue is actionable, has something you can do on it, because so many issues in so many projects sit there and you read them and I don't know how to fix this, I don't know what to do with this. Making sure all your issues are actionable is really important. Once you mark something as jump in, it needs to be clearly defined. You see a lot of these up for grabs and jump in issues, they're not clearly defined, they're just someone has put up an issue and they've just marked it, community can deal with that. Putting the time and effort to rewrite that so it's really clear what needs to be done has helped Shouldy massively. And then closing issues which can't be resolved. Huge, huge benefit for me is just making sure I close all of this stuff out. I've touched on quite a lot of this, but the learning, I just wanted to reiterate that when you take over a project or having a project, just fixing everything yourself has been, I find, one of the most detrimental things to my projects, because you're changing things. People have invested time learning your project and the way things work. If you go, oh, I think it all can work better and do internal refactorings and those sort of things, it becomes quite excluding for the community. So instead, take them on that journey, create a roadmap, create a bunch of tests and or issues that let you stage that. There's also quite a few things that I haven't done in previous projects that I think is super important that you need to ensure is all up and running. Spend your time on these things rather than trying to fix issues, because without those, people aren't going to be able to get involved. Things like making sure you have good documentation and making sure it's easy to contribute to the documentation is massively powerful. I'll show you, when I jump in and show you Shouldy, the solution, I'll show you the way I do docs, and I've tried a couple of different ways, and a project called Read the Docs has been great help for me. Automated builds and releases, make sure you do that. So I use AppVeyor for all of my projects now, which is a great build platform for .NET. It's free for open source, which is another great thing. And then it builds pull requests, and you get the little tick and cross next to all of the pull requests. Make sure you have a good README. README is the entry point for your project. Putting time and effort into that is huge. Make sure that you have little badges set up, linked to your Gitter channel, which is a chat room for your project. Those sort of things. Put them in your README, and it really helps people have that entry point to find where everything is. Add a contributing.markdown file. In GitHub, if you have that, it gives you, when you're submitting a pull request, it gives you a nice little banner saying, please read the contributing.markdown file. And you can put in things like how you do testing, what your standards are, anything like that. Make sure you make that sort of stuff clear for your project. A lot of projects actually don't have licenses. Make sure you have a license for projects, because otherwise it's just people don't know what where their contributions are going and how they can use your project. Tests, ironically, Shouldy did not have a lot of tests, being an assertion framework when I took over, and a lot of what we wanted to where we wanted to take Shouldy, take all of the error messages to the next level, required us to backfill a lot of these tests. And then finally, keeping issues up to date. This is what I find I spend most of my time, just continually triaging issues, keeping them up to date, making sure they don't get all of these issues that just have no actions. Keeping those closed out, closing them and creating up for grabs issues that are clearly defined, those sort of things. Talked a little bit about this before. I think having multiple maintainers and mentoring new maintainers for projects is just so important. If you have projects, please spend that time helping people who have submitted 2 or 3 pull requests to your project. Take them to the next level, help them become a core maintainer of your project. And if people are struggling to contribute, spend the time with them to actually teach them how to contribute well to open source. I'll show you guys the Shouldy, my GitHub of Shouldy, and touch on a few different things. Come on. Any questions so far while I'm making my...
What is your preview?
Yeah, I never turned that off when the RTM came out. I really need to reinstall and go back to RC because it causes me so many problems. Last 2 presentations I've done, when I've plugged in the HDMI, my context menus stopped working, and after one of them, my start menu wouldn't even open. So this is the Shouldy README. I found adding these the badges really handy. But what I wanted to call out was the docs. So Shouldy's docs actually is using something called Read the Docs. Because the internet's a little bit slow, I pulled it up earlier. There's actually an open up for grabs issue for Shouldy's docs. We're migrating across from readme.io to read the docs. So this is a good example of where you can try and get the community all helping out and pitching towards one big goal. Read the docs is great because it's actually stored, all of the source code is stored in the repository. So I have a docs folder, and inside the docs is all of the different assertion files. So this is using, you can either use Markdown or Sphinx and RST. RST is a documentation format that allows you to do cool things like your code samples can actually come from files in your project. So as you update the samples, the docs stay up to date. You can't do those sort of things with Markdown. So read the docs is cool because as you are going through your release process, you tag a particular version, read the docs will snapshot your documentation for that version. So your docs can actually evolve over time with your project. Super, super important. Here's an example of a jump-in issue that I've got. I've opened this up for the community. There's a bunch of docs, and it's time-consuming to migrate docs from one format to another. So I've got an open issue here with all of the different Shouldy methods that need to be moved over. People can just submit pull requests for individual ones of these, and then I'll mark it as done. We can burn down the entire task, and then when it's done, it's closed, and then I can do a release and say thanks for all the people that have helped improve the Shouldy documentation. If you don't know about this feature with the task lists in GitHub, quite handy. You just do a list and put open bracket, close bracket. Really handy for doing tasks. Setting up builds. Who's used AppVeyor? A couple of you. So AppVeyor is the build platform that I'm using. And you can see GitHub has a really nice integration. So you can see these two are failing. That one there is passing. You can see straight away what's happening in your projects. So this is AppVeyor. It's a really nice experience. You can see the history of all of the builds. You can create artifacts, and then you can deploy. So it gives you the nice flow that you do your build, you produce the NuGet packages from your build, and then I can just go here and hit update, and that will allow me to deploy to either GitHub or my GitHub release or NuGet. At the moment, this one's red because there was an issue with the GitHub changed their API. That's now fixed, so if I redeployed this, it would actually go green. But this is where another project of mine, I just want to call out if you're not using it. Git version. If you try and doing semantic versioning in your projects, this is one of those things that was kind of painful for me, creating pre-release packages and those sort of things. Git version allows you to look at your history of your Git package, and then so it's looking at all of the different pull requests and stuff, and then it ends up generating a version number for you. So you can see in this one, my version number is actually 261 pull request, and then the pull request number gives you pre-release packages for pull requests, and as you're creating release branches, it creates RC and beta packages and things. So that's a quick overview of the bits and pieces that I've done in Shouldy. Using read the docs for documentation. If anyone has different ways of doing documentation that works for you, keen to hear it. But docs has been one of those things that I found really difficult to get right, and this has been the best one so far. So there's three main things I covered today. Getting involved. If you're not involved, which everyone here is, actually submit that first pull request. Stepping, please get involved with helping maintainers maintain these projects and become part of a community. There's two sides of a community. There's all the people there's the people running the community, and then there's the people in it. And ideally, a lot of these projects, the communities we can build will really, really help the .NET ecosystem. You see the JavaScript communities and the Ruby communities, they're really rich and vibrant. So many people contributing, and as soon as you put something up on NPM, it's being downloaded and you're getting issues on GitHub. That community focus in the JavaScript world, I think we're getting there in .NET. It's really been a cool thing to see. So that's been my journey on open source and reviving Shouldy. That's my Twitter handle, Jake. Thanks for listening.